In the shadows of the Third Reich, there was an organization that brought Nazi cruelty to unimaginable levels. They were not simple soldiers, nor only indoctrinated fanatics. They were the elite of terror, the human machinery designed to kill without compassion. The Waffen-SS were born as Hitler's personal guard, but soon transformed into a parallel army, responsible for some of the worst atrocities of the Second World War. Behind their impeccable black uniform hid an absolute oath to the Führer and an ideology that saw millions of people as disposable. From the bloodiest battlefields of the Eastern Front to the massacres of civilians and the administration of concentration camps, the Waffen-SS were the most brutal embodiment of total war. Today we are going to delve into their darkest history and discover why their name remains synonymous with death and horror. Of the darkest and bloodiest side of the Waffen-SS, difficult to watch. Adolf Hitler's early experience with the Sturmabteilung, SA, or assault detachment, led him to deeply distrust large paramilitary forces with the capacity to act on their own. Although the SA were crucial for the rise of the Nazi Party, their rapid growth and tendency to act in an undisciplined manner began to be perceived as a risk to his personal authority. After the Nazis came to power in 1933, Hitler began to rely increasingly on a smaller organization, strictly hierarchical and of absolute loyalty, the Schutzstaffel, SS, the Protection Squadron. Born as a small group of personal escorts, this force evolved into one of the most feared pillars of the state apparatus. The military core of what would later be known as the Waffen-SS arose from two fundamental formations, the SS Verfügungstruppe, or disposal troops, and the Leibstandarte SS, originally created as Hitler's personal bodyguard unit. In its early days, both groups were tiny and their members were carefully chosen for their physical endurance, discipline, and ideological loyalty. Unlike the SA, with their brown uniforms, the SS adopted a black uniform that symbolized their exclusive character and their iron discipline. Among their early leaders were Josef Berchtold and Erhard Heiden, although the true impetus came in 1929 when Heinrich Himmler assumed leadership. Without a distinguished military background, his participation in the First World War was limited to a brief service as a cadet. Himmler stood out as an organizer, giving the SAS a structure that combined intelligence, internal security, and later combat forces. Within the early SS were also key figures such as Joseph Sepp Dietrich, close to Hitler, and future commander of elite divisions, as well as Gottlob Berger and Friedrich Wilhelm Krüger, who alternated roles between the SA and the SS, reflecting the dynamism and internal power struggles of the Nazi regime. By the late 1930s, the combined membership of the SA and SS exceeded 100,000 troops, surpassing even the size of the German army, still restricted by the Treaty of Versailles. Although in theory the SS remained under the authority of Ernst Röhm, head of the SA, in practice they increasingly answered directly to Hitler. Röhm dreamed of transforming the SA into the core of a new revolutionary army, a vision that clashed head-on with the Führer, determined to limit his power and avoid any threat to his absolute control. Hitler decided to place his faith in the SS, whom he saw as a more disciplined and politically loyal organization. In 1931, Heinrich Himmler began shaping this core with its own identity. In his speeches to new recruits, he evoked the tradition of elite guards throughout history, mentioning the personal escorts of Julius Caesar, Napoleon, or Frederick the Great. "There has always been a guard," he proclaimed, "and that of the new Germany will be the SS." At that time, the SA had already grown to more than 400,000 members compared to the barely 52,000 of the SS. Neither force was fully armed, although it was not uncommon to see their members with clubs or pistols. Violent clashes with rival political groups were frequent, and the imposing marches of the SA caused unease in the high command of the German army. Hitler began to fear that Ernst Röhm, leader of the SA, might use that power to attempt a coup. The tension culminated in June of 1934 when the so-called Night of the Long Knives took place. In a swift operation, Röhm and dozens of SA leaders were arrested and executed by members of the SS. Among those involved were Theodor Eicke, commander of the Dachau concentration camp, and his assistant, Michael Lippert. Himmler, in coordination with Josef Sepp Dietrich, directed the capture of about 150 additional SA officers on the 13th of July of 1934. Days later, Hitler appeared before the Reichstag to defend the purge, declaring that 61 people had been executed, 13 had died resisting, and 3 had committed suicide. However, later investigations estimate that the real number of victims could have easily exceeded 1,000. Although the SA were not dissolved, their influence was severely weakened. The SS then went on to occupy the preeminent place in the Nazi paramilitary structure. Hitler allowed the regular army to maintain some supervision over SS recruitment, but starting in 1935, the Waffen-SS began to develop autonomously. The Führer verbally authorized that, in case of war, the SS-Verfügungstruppe could be temporarily integrated into the army, although in times of peace they had to operate separately from the armed forces and the police. In 1938, Hitler made official that the military units of the SS would be treated as a permanent armed force. 2 years later, in 1940, they received the definitive name Waffen-SS, Armed SS. For him, they represented a secure counterbalance to the regular army, an institution to which he never granted full trust. In order to give them real combat capability, officers with experience from the army itself were incorporated into their ranks. Among them stood out General Paul Hauser, a respected fighter of the First World War who assumed responsibility for training and organization. He founded 2 officer schools, one in Bad Tolz and another in Braunschweig. General Heinz Guderian would later describe him as a capable and principled soldier. Another key figure was Felix Steiner, who had commanded an SS regiment before the war and served as a junior officer in the Great War. Steiner introduced flexible and aggressive tactics, inspired by the assault troops of 1918. Hitler's original bodyguard unit, the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, grew into a full combat division under the leadership of Dietrich. The Das Reich division emerged from the former Verfügungstruppe, and many more were later created. Thus, Himmler ended up directing a genuine parallel army, equipped with tanks, artillery, and support units. Massive recruitment had a key source: the Hitler Youth. Within it, the Jungvolk Youth Division became a breeding ground for future fighters. These organizations were mandatory for German children and adolescents, and although at first many believed that they were patriotic youth groups, they soon discovered that their training included marches, field exercises, and military instruction. By 1939, more than 7,700,000 young people were enrolled, and at 17 years old, many were encouraged and often pressured to join the Waffen-SS. That year, a new law universalized compulsory military service, formalizing the Hitler Youth system. Baldur von Schirach, leader of the organization, answered directly to Hitler. He had American ancestry through his great-grandfather, who had served as a Union officer during the United States Civil War. Journalist William Shearer would later describe him as the dictator of youth in Germany. Under his command, the Hitler Youth absorbed all other youth groups in the country, creating a direct communication channel both with the army and with the Waffen-SS. At the same time, Heinrich Himmler extended the influence of the SS over internal security. With the support of Reinhard Heydrich, he merged the various regional police forces into a single national system that included the criminal police, the Gestapo, and the security service, SD. The SS, in this way, obtained direct control over the police institutions of all Germany. This centralization strengthened the authoritarian state and reduced internal opposition to a minimum. It is important to understand that the SS was not a single organization. The Waffen-SS was its military branch, composed of frontline combat troops. The Allgemeine SS, General SS, carried out internal political and ceremonial functions. The Sicherheitsdienst, SD, handled intelligence. The Gestapo focused on state security. The Totenkopf-Verbände, Death's Head units, administered the concentration camps in the occupied territories. From the Blitzkrieg to the Eastern Front, the trial by fire. In 1939, Himmler ordered that the youngest members of these guard units be transferred to field divisions, which caused an overlap between the military and administrative personnel of the SS. As the war advanced, Himmler and Gottlob Berger faced obstacles in expanding the Waffen-SS within Germany. Recruitment quotas and the resistance of the army limited their possibilities. To resolve this, Berger proposed looking beyond the borders of the Reich. On the 7th of August of 1940, he formally suggested that the SS begin to recruit in Allied and occupied nations, a measure that would soon transform the Waffen-SS into a multinational force. Berger, responsible for recruitment under Himmler's orders, argued that this expansion would not come into conflict with the needs of the other branches of the armed forces, as long as the new recruits came from sectors of the population that were not assigned to the regular army. In addition, he considered that this plan should remain under the exclusive control of the SS leadership. Not everyone received the idea well. Theodor Eicke, commander of the Totenkopf division, originally formed by personnel from the concentration camps, was reluctant. He complained that many of the new recruits had criminal records or did not meet the strict racial and disciplinary standards of the SAS. Finally, in April of 1941, Himmler overruled Eicke's opposition and ordered that the Totenkopf units be fully integrated into the Waffen-SS. Hitler, who regarded the SS as the organization most loyal to him personally granted them his famous motto, "My honor is loyalty." In December of 1941, Hitler declared before party officials that his 6 SS divisions were made up of men without religious concerns, capable of facing death with absolute serenity. He was determined that the Waffen-SS remain an elite force. At the beginning of 1942, he warned against too rapid an expansion, explaining that such troops should suffer greater losses on the battlefield as a way to discourage those who only sought the prestige of the uniform. He emphasized that the SS should be highly selective since he conceived them as the future ruling class of the Reich. Hitler considered that recruits from Scandinavia were racially suitable to be integrated into their ranks. In a peculiar comment, he recalled that in his youth he liked to wear short trousers and, in 1942, he joked about the idea of forming SS guard units equipped with leather short trousers. He imagined that this uniform could be worn by soldiers of any origin, whether from the north or the south of Europe. Later, he again mentioned the formation of a supposed Highlands Brigade with that same attire. However, the idea never went beyond paper. Throughout the war, the Waffen-SS came to raise, at least in theory, 38 divisions. Their total strength reached approximately 910,000 men. Despite this growth, they never came to represent more than 10% of the entirety of the German armed forces. Many officers of the traditional army observed this expansion with suspicion. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, for example, later commented that the creation of SS divisions with political motivations had meant a waste of valuable manpower for the war effort. Major General Friedrich von Mellinin similarly criticized the concept of the Waffen-SS, calling it a mistaken attempt to apply the policy of divide and conquer. In his opinion, the creation of a separate force responded more to the need to maintain political control than to a true purpose of strengthening the general military capacity. Of the divisions of the Waffen-SS, 7 were fully equipped armored units and 8 corresponded to motorized infantry divisions, known as Panzer Grenadiers. Among the most famous armored divisions were the 1st SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, the 2nd SS Das Reich, and the 12th Hitler Youth Division. Others, such as the 5th SS Viking, the 9th SS Hohenstaufen, and the 10th SS Frundsberg, were also recognized for their performance in combat. The 3rd SS Totenkopf Division, on the other hand, remained less publicized due to its dark origins linked to the concentration camp system. Among the Panzer Grenadier divisions, the 4th SS Police Division and the 16th SS Reichsführer SS Division stood out. Others, such as the 11th SS Nordland and the 17th SS Götz von Berlichingen, took part in fronts such as Italy and Normandy. There also existed divisions such as the 18th SS Horst Wessel, the 23rd SS Nederland, and the 28th SS Wallonian. Many of these never surpassed the size of a regiment. Typically, these divisions had a tank battalion and another of assault guns. However, it is important to note that the Waffen-SS were not the only corps with troops politically loyal to the regime. At the beginning of 1933, Hermann Göring, then Minister of the Interior of Prussia, had created his own paramilitary force, an auxiliary police unit of about 50,000 men, many coming from the SA and the SS. Later, as head of the Luftwaffe, he continued to attract motivated recruits, especially from the Hitler Youth. The Luftwaffe never had problems filling its ranks, but after the Battle of Britain, it accumulated more ground personnel than it could employ. By the middle of 1942, there were around 170,000 surplus ground crew members. The army tried to absorb these men as infantry replacements, but Göring refused, arguing that they were loyal National Socialists who should not be exposed to an older corps of officers nor to their religious traditions. As a consequence, he created 22 field divisions under the control of the Luftwaffe. These formations proved weak and poorly suited for ground combat. Many could have reinforced depleted units on the Eastern Front, but instead they became a separate structure, lacking coordination and effectiveness. At the beginning of 1942, German losses on the Eastern Front already exceeded 500,000 men, not counting the sick or wounded. The demand for manpower grew relentlessly, while the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Waffen-SS, and the Reich Labor Service competed for the same limited pool of men fit for service. The Luftwaffe even formed airborne divisions that in time ended up serving as infantry. Many of these units, created in the final stage of the war, were never fully equipped nor staffed. As the conflict went on, the Waffen-SS gained an elite reputation. Himmler fed this image through the SS newspaper Das Schwarze Korps, the Black Corps, and through constant coverage in the official Nazi party daily, the Völkischer Beobachter. In 1944, the former had a weekly circulation of 750,000 copies, while the latter reached 1,700,000 daily copies. This propaganda machinery contributed to the mythification of the Waffen-SS, comparing them with legendary corps such as the Spartans, the Roman Praetorian Guard, or the Viking warriors. In reality, such a reputation was based mainly on the performance of a few select divisions, almost all formed by native Germans. Many other divisions were made up of young recruits from the Hitler Youth or from the Reich Labor Service. Although some of the early Waffen-SS units were recognized for their discipline and efficiency, this was due to a harsh selection process and relentless training, always tied to ideological demands. As a consequence, several of these formations operated with a level of political fanaticism that often directly influenced their conduct on the battlefield. The development of the armored divisions of the Waffen-SS did not respond solely to political motives. In 1943, the strategic situation of Germany had deteriorated severely after the defeats at El Alamein, the Allied landings in North Africa, and the catastrophe of Stalingrad. The Reich urgently needed more mechanized and mobile forces that could react quickly on several fronts. It was in this context that the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, Das Reich, and Totenkopf divisions were reorganized as armored infantry formations, incorporating tank battalions into their structure. At the beginning of 1943, General Heinz Guderian was appointed Inspector General of Armored Troops with the mission of supervising the tank units of both the Army and the Waffen-SS. Practice of maintaining separate supply systems for each force, and worked to standardize the production and distribution of combat vehicles. From that moment on, the Waffen-SS divisions began to receive state-of-the-art tanks and armored vehicles, including the Tiger and Panther, in many cases even before the units of the regular army. In 1944, a standard Waffen-SS Panzer division could count on up to 15,000 frontline soldiers and around 6,000 support personnel. Its basic structure included 1 tank regiment, 2 mechanized infantry regiments, 1 artillery regiment, anti-tank, anti-aircraft, reconnaissance, signals, and engineer units. Each tank regiment deployed around 2,000 men, organized into 2 battalions, each with 4 companies operating approximately 15 tanks each. The divisions also integrated self-propelled anti-aircraft vehicles such as the Wirbelwind, Ostwind, and Flakpanzer IV Mobilwagen in response to the growing Allied air superiority. The assault gun battalions were usually smaller, with 3 companies totaling about 20 tanks and nearly 300 men. The anti-tank units combined mobile tank destroyers such as the Jagdpanzer IV with towed guns, among them the 75mm PK-40. Each mechanized infantry regiment had 3 battalions and about 4,000 soldiers, transported mainly in SDKFZ, 251 half-tracks. Artillery support included 150mm Hummel self-propelled vehicles, 105mm Westby flamethrower carriers, and heavy mortar carriers. The anti-aircraft battalions were divided into 5 companies, 3 with 20mm light guns and 2 with 88mm heavy guns. The artillery regiment of a Panzer SS division was composed of 4 battalions, each with 3 batteries. One of the batteries had self-propelled artillery, while the others used towed pieces. By the end of 1,944 rocket launcher battalions equipped with Nebelwerfer had been incorporated, consisting of 3 companies with 150mm launchers and 1 with 210mm launchers, towed or mounted on half-tracks. Finally, the feared Tiger III and Tiger II tanks were not part of the standard structure of the Panzer SS divisions, but were grouped in independent heavy tank battalions deployed wherever exceptional striking power was required. In 1944, the 1st SS Panzer Corps operating in the West was supported by the Heavy Tank Battalion 101, which carried the insignia of crossed keys and oak leaves, symbol of its link with the Leibstandarte. Often this battalion operated together with the 102, belonging to the Hitler Youth Division, while the 103 supported the 2nd SS Panzer Corps and the SS Germanic Corps on the Eastern Front as the new Tiger II tanks arrived. These heavy battalions were renumbered as 501, 502 and 503 and remained as central-level assets deployed wherever they were most needed. Battalion 501 participated in the Ardennes offensive, 502 was destroyed during the Battle of Berlin, and 503 fought intensely in East Prussia before its survivors surrendered. One of the reasons why the Waffen-SS looked visually distinct was their use of camouflage. Their troops wore patterned trousers and reversible helmet covers adapted to summer and winter conditions. Later in the war, they received full camouflage uniforms, including trousers and tunics. The crews of armored vehicles and artillery wore one-piece camouflage overalls. As German manpower decreased, Himmler increasingly resorted to ethnic Germans and foreign volunteers from occupied countries. Although this allowed the number of divisions to expand, it was often at the cost of training, cohesion, and discipline. An example of this were the 16th SS Panzer Grenadier Division Reichsführer SS, which included Austrian and Slovenian personnel. The development of the armored divisions of the Waffen-SS did not respond solely to political motives. In 1943, the strategic situation of Germany had deteriorated severely after the defeats at El Alamein, the Allied landings in North Africa, and the catastrophe of Stalingrad. The Reich urgently needed more mechanized and mobile forces that could react quickly on several fronts. It was in this context that the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, Das Reich and Totenkopf divisions were reorganized as armored infantry formations, incorporating tank battalions into their structure. At the beginning of 1943, General Heinz Guderian was appointed Inspector General of Armored Troops with the mission of supervising the tank units of both the Army and the Waffen-SS. Practice of maintaining separate supply systems for each force and worked to standardize the production and distribution of combat vehicles. From that moment on, the Waffen-SS divisions began to receive state-of-the-art tanks and armored vehicles, including the Tiger and Panther, in many cases even before the units of the regular army. In 1944, a standard Waffen-SS Panzer division could count on up to 15,000 frontline soldiers and around 6,000 support personnel. Its basic structure included 1 tank regiment, 2 mechanized infantry regiments, 1 artillery regiment, anti-tank, anti-aircraft, reconnaissance, signals, and engineer units. Each tank regiment deployed around 2,000 men, organized into 2 battalions, each with 4 companies operating approximately 15 tanks each. The divisions also integrated self-propelled anti-aircraft vehicles such as the Wirbelwind, Ostwind, and Flakpanzer IV Mobilwagen in response to the growing Allied air superiority. The assault gun battalions were usually smaller, with 3 companies totaling about 20 tanks and nearly 300 men. The anti-tank units combined mobile tank destroyers such as the Jagdpanzer IV with towed guns, among them the 75mm PK-40. Each mechanized infantry regiment had 3 battalions and about 4,000 soldiers, transported mainly in SDKFZ, 251 half-tracks. Artillery support included 150mm Hummel self-propelled vehicles, 105mm Westby, flamethrower carriers, and heavy mortar carriers. The anti-aircraft battalions were divided into 5 companies, 3 with 20mm light guns and 2 with 88mm heavy guns. The artillery regiment of a Panzer SS division was composed of 4 battalions, each with 3 batteries. One of the batteries had self-propelled artillery, while the others used towed pieces. By the end of 1,944 rocket launcher battalions equipped with Nebelwerfer had been incorporated, consisting of 3 companies with 150mm launchers and 1 with 210mm launchers towed or mounted on half-tracks. Finally, the feared Tiger III and Tiger II tanks were not part of the standard structure of the Panzer SS divisions, but were grouped in independent heavy tank battalions deployed wherever exceptional striking power was required. In 1944, the 1st SS Panzer Corps operating in the West was supported by the Heavy Tank Battalion 101, which carried the insignia of crossed keys and oak leaves, symbol of its link with the Leibstandarte. Often this battalion operated together with the 102, belonging to the Hitler Youth Division, while the 103 supported the 2nd SS Panzer Corps and the SS Germanic Corps on the Eastern Front as the new Tiger II tanks arrived. These heavy battalions were renumbered as 501, 502, and 503 and remained as central-level assets deployed wherever they were most needed. Battalion 501 participated in the Ardennes offensive, 502 was destroyed during the Battle of Berlin, and 503 fought intensely in East Prussia before its survivors surrendered. One of the reasons why the Waffen-SS looked visually distinct was their use of camouflage. Their troops wore patterned trousers and reversible helmet covers adapted to summer and winter conditions. Later in the war, they received full camouflage uniforms, including trousers and tunics. The crews of armored vehicles and artillery wore one-piece camouflage overalls. As German manpower decreased, Himmler increasingly resorted to ethnic Germans and foreign volunteers from occupied countries. Although this allowed the number of divisions to expand, it was often at the cost of training, cohesion, and discipline. An example of this were the 16th SS Panzer Grenadier Division Reichsführer SS, which included Austrian and Slovenian personnel, and the 28th SS Panzer Grenadier Division Wallonian, composed mainly of Belgian volunteers. Both were equipped with armored vehicles and formed part of the broader structure of the Waffen-SS. These units were integrated into the growing number of foreign divisions created during the war. Many were called Freiwilligen, that is, volunteer units, which included mountain grenadiers, panzer grenadiers, and cavalry from a wide range of nationalities from the occupied European territories and Allied countries. Their military value varied considerably. A few acted with discipline, while many others were poorly trained, poorly equipped, and were considered unreliable for conventional operations. As a consequence, a large part of these divisions were assigned to security missions and anti-partisan operations in rear areas. However, these tasks often turned into violent reprisals that caused numerous civilian casualties. There also existed a notable inconsistency in the way these units were labeled. Some formations which, although technically under SS control, did not meet the strict racial criteria of the organization, received the suffix of the SS instead of the usual prefix SS. This naming convention pursued a political objective: to conceal that such divisions did not fit the ideological profile originally intended for the Waffen-SS. The SS system encompassed many units that operated outside the limits of conventional military conduct. Although the worst crimes were committed by specialized forces, such as the Einsatzgruppen or the concentration camp personnel, the frontline combat divisions of the Waffen-SS also took part in atrocities. Some were involved in war crimes on multiple fronts. One of the most serious episodes occurred during the Warsaw Uprising in 1944, when a large number of civilians perished in brutal repression operations. Despite these dark moral and legal antecedents, the armored formations of the Waffen-SS earned a military reputation for their effectiveness in the most difficult battlefield conditions. Hitler relied increasingly on them to stabilize critical fronts or to launch decisive counterattacks. In 1944 and early 1945, the experienced Waffen-SS divisions played a key role in halting Allied offensives at Arnhem, Wavre, and in the Ardennes, where they managed to delay or block major advances. During this period, the operational difference between the regular army and the Waffen-SS was considerably reduced, and often both forces fought side by side as a single combat force. The Waffen-SS proved to be tactically competent and resilient. However, their chief, Heinrich Himmler, lacked true military experience. At the end of the war, he was appointed to lead the Upper Army Group and later the Vistula Army Group. These assignments responded more to political interests than to military merits. Both commands turned out to be brief and were marked by poor results. Himmler was excluded from key operations such as the Ardennes campaign and dismissed before being able to lead Operation Solstice on the Eastern Front in the final months of the conflict. By then, the offensive capacity of the Waffen-SS had been drastically reduced. The shortage of supplies, the heavy human losses, and the general strategic collapse limited their ability to influence the outcome of the war. Even so, morale in many of their units remained firm. These divisions took part in Hitler's last efforts in Hungary and Belgium, when the front was collapsing and the Red Army advanced toward Berlin. In April of 1945, the Waffen-SS were among the last formations that attempted to maintain organized resistance when the German capital was encircled. Hitler then expressed his deep disappointment because they failed to defend Berlin. In his final days, he ordered that the SS insignia be removed from the uniforms, a gesture that marked a symbolic break with the organization he had once held in such high esteem. The SS motto, "My honor is loyalty," had by then lost all meaning in a regime that was collapsing from within. The 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, had its origins in the early years of the Nazi Party. It arose from Hitler's personal protection unit, formed after the dissolution of the short-lived SA Headquarters Guard in March of 1933. In September of that year, Sepp Dietrich established in Berlin an SS Guard detachment with 120 men. Later integrated into the SS Verfügungstruppe, this detachment would be one of the direct precursors of the Waffen-SS. Initially stationed in the Alexander Barracks in Berlin, the unit was later transferred to Lichterfelde. By the end of 1933, it merged with a second unit formed in Munich and was renamed in 1934 as the Adolf Hitler Guard of Corps. Shortly after, it officially became the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, and grew until it reached regimental strength. The unit took part in the annexation of Austria as part of the 16th Army Corps under General Heinz Guderian, and later in the occupation of Czechoslovakia. During the invasion of Poland, it served with Army Group South under the command of Dietrich, and afterward was deployed in France and the Netherlands. Although initially kept in reserve, it entered combat against the retreating British forces near Dunkirk and participated in the final phase of the campaign as part of the 14th Army Corps. Its sister division, the Das Reich, was formed in October of 1939 from the regiments Deutschland, Germania and Der Führer under the command of Paul Hauser. This division fought in the 1940 campaign on the Western Front and was later assigned to the border with Vichy France before being sent to the Netherlands and the Balkans. During this latter campaign, a detachment under Fritz Klingenberg achieved the famous surrender of Belgrade without firing a single shot. Still under Hauser, the division participated in the invasion of the Soviet Union, remaining on the Eastern Front until August of 1941, when it was withdrawn to be refitted during the winter. Under the new command of Wilhelm Bittrich, it took part in the failed offensive against Moscow. Meanwhile, a third division was formed from personnel previously assigned to duties in concentration camps. In October of 1939, 3 SS Guard regiments, with a total of 6,500 men, were combined to create the Totenkopf division. Theodor Eicke, inspector of concentration camps and of the SS Guard formations, was appointed commander. The troops came from camps such as Buchenwald, Dachau, Mauthausen, Sachsenhausen and Flossenbürg. Many of the officers came from the Verfügungstruppe, while some additional elements had combat experience gained in the Polish campaign, although at the beginning they were equipped with material of Czech origin. The initial doubts about the unit's capacity were soon dispelled. General Max Weichs, commander of the Second Army, inspected the division in April of 1940 and confirmed that it was a fully modernized, motorized infantry unit. The Totenkopf participated in the Western Campaign and was involved in the controversial Le Paradis incident, where British prisoners of war were executed after their surrender. The officer in command, Fritz Knöchlein, had previously served in Dachau and later went on to lead a volunteer unit in the Courland region. By the middle of 1941, the Totenkopf and its related formations totaled about 40,000 men. However, many of its units remained stationed in occupied territories such as France and Norway. When Operation Barbarossa began, the division was deployed with nearly 19,000 troops taking part in the siege of Leningrad along with the 4th SS Police Division. Later, it was transferred to the south of France to rest and re-equip, being officially renamed the 3rd SS Panzer Grenadier Division Totenkopf at the end of 1942. On the 22nd of October of 1943, the unit was elevated to the category of Panzer Division under the command of Max Simon, fighting intensely in Kovel, Belgorod and Kursk. At the beginning of 1943, Gottlob Berger proposed the creation of a new division made up of members of the Hitler Youth barely 17 years old. Hitler approved the idea and on the 10th of February ordered Berger to begin recruitment. Although Berger aspired to command it, the post went to Fritz Witt, former member of the Hitler Youth and experienced commander of the 1st SS Panzer Division, with previous service in Poland, France, Greece and the Eastern Front. On the 1st of May of 1943, a first group of 8,000 volunteers began training, although they only received 4 weeks of instruction instead of the planned period. A second contingent was planned between July and September, reaching a total force of more than 16,000 men. Training took place in Beverloo, Belgium. At approximately the same time, the 9th SS Panzer Division was formed under the command of Wilhelm Bittrich. This unit was composed mainly of recruits from the Reich Labor Service. Bittrich, a veteran commander, had led the Deutschland Regiment and later the 2nd SS Division Das Reich. In parallel, the 10th SS Panzer Division, led by Michael Lippert, was created in February of 1943. Named Hohenstaufen, it was made up of young men only 18 years old, also coming from the compulsory labor program. Its name honored Georg von Frundsberg, a 16th-century general in the service of the Holy Roman Empire. The Leibstandarte had been promoted to a brigade in August of 1940 to take part in the planned invasion of Great Britain. However, after the cancellation of the operation, it was sent to Romania and took part in the Balkan campaign. It crossed Yugoslavia into Greece, playing a crucial role in the surrender of the Hellenic forces. The reconnaissance battalion, under the command of Kurt Meyer, captured the Klissura Pass and took more than 11,000 prisoners, later receiving the capitulation of several Greek formations. In June of 1941, the division expanded into a full motorized infantry formation and participated in the invasion of the Soviet Union, fighting in Kiev and Rostov before being sent to France for refitting in 1942. It returned to the Eastern Front in 1943 as a Panzer Grenadier Division under Theodor Wisch, taking part in the battles of Kharkov and Kursk. After Kursk, it was briefly sent to Italy before returning east as a panzer division, suffering heavy losses. In April of 1944, it was redeployed to France, establishing its headquarters in Turnhout, Belgium, and becoming integrated into the 1st SS Panzer Corps. More than 2,000 men from the 12th SS were transferred into its ranks, and it was assigned new equipment to face the coming offensives. Despite all this, at the time of the Normandy landings, the division was below its nominal strength. Many vehicles were missing or non-operational. Of the Panzer Grenadier units, none had functional armored vehicles. Furthermore, the half-tracks and more than 1,000 technical personnel were still in Germany. The Reich division, which in 1942 had been promoted to Panzer Grenadier status, remained stationed in France before returning to the Eastern Front at the beginning of 1943 under the command of Georg Kepler. There it took part in the battles of Kharkov and Kursk, fighting until the end, fanaticism or blind loyalty. In April of 1944, a detachment of 2,500 men was transferred to the Bordeaux region under the command of Heinz Lammerding, an officer with experience in anti-partisan operations in the East. Lammerding was formally appointed commander of the 2nd SS Division in January of 1944, although his promotion raised doubts. His close relationship with Himmler probably influenced his designation. In May of that year, the division absorbed 9,000 new recruits and received a shipment of tanks and assault guns. The 9th SS Panzer Division, still in formation, was initially assigned to the 1st SS Panzer Corps of Sepp Dietrich, along with the 1st and the 12th SS Divisions. At the beginning of 1944, it was transferred to the 2nd SS Panzer Corps under the command of Paul Hauser, participating in the operation to rescue German forces encircled in the Kamenets-Podolsk pocket. After that mission, it was kept in reserve, but after the Allied landing in Normandy, it was sent to the Western Front under Bittrich's command, arriving in France on the 12th of June. The 10th SS Panzer Division Frundsberg, initially commanded by Karl Fischer von Treuenfeld and later by Heinz Hamel, fought for the first time at the beginning of 1944 in Tarnopol. Like the 9th SS Division, it was quickly sent to Normandy in an attempt to contain the Allied advance. From the 1st of June of 1944, the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend was considered, on paper, one of the most powerful armored formations available to the German command. Its nominal strength was about 20,500 men, although around 2,400 were farther north in Arnhem, Netherlands. It is estimated that the division began the Normandy campaign with approximately 17,000 troops. Its armored component, the 12th Panzer Regiment, was under the command of Max Wünsche and deployed a considerable force, an authorized complement of 100 tanks, consisting of 21 Panzer IV and 79 Panzer V Panther. On the 7th of June, one day after the Allied landing, it received an additional reinforcement of 13 Panthers. Positioned as a key piece in the German response to the invasion, the 12th SS played a central role in the defense of Normandy. Its armored forces and infantry delayed the Allied advance for nearly 3 months in a series of intense and costly battles, earning a reputation for fierce resistance and close-quarters fighting under enormous pressure. Over time, the Waffen-SS would include numerous foreign divisions. However, one of the first peculiar formations made up exclusively of German personnel came from the National Police. About 15,000 uniformed policemen were used to form what became known as the 4th SS Police Division. Heinrich Himmler could not freely recruit from the German population due to the objections of the regular army. However, as head of all German police, he did have access to other sources of personnel. He could draw men from the Ordnungspolizei, the uniformed civil police, as well as from reservists of the General SS. The transformation of police officers into frontline combat troops was not without challenges. Many of those policemen were older men, unwilling to serve far from their families, and their absence created gaps in the enforcement of civil law. Some were already members of the SS, such as Heinz Jürgens and Hans Trauter, who attended officer training at the SS school in Bad Tölz before joining the Berlin police force. When the war broke out, both joined the newly formed police division. The division was created by Karl Pfeffer-Wildenbruch in October of 1939, and its troops initially wore a mixture of SS and police uniforms. It remained under the administrative command of Kurt Daluege, head of the Ordnungspolizei. Daluege had previously led the Berlin SS and was tasked with removing police officers who were not considered fully committed to the National Socialist cause. This purge weakened the force, and to repair the damage, Daluege offered dismissed officers the possibility of rejoining if they completed political re-education. He also encouraged members of the General SS to join the police. During the first years of the Second World War, the term Waffen-SS began to be used officially, although not all units linked to the SS were considered fully part of this force. An example was the Police Division, created in 1939, which lacked priority in equipment and used captured weaponry, mainly Czech and French. Organized into infantry regiments and horse-drawn artillery, its mobility depended on horses and bicycles. Initially, the division carried out occupation tasks in Poland and in 1940 briefly participated in the French campaign. Between 1940 and 1942, about 30 similar units were formed, deployed mostly in occupied areas for security and anti-resistance operations. In 1943, they were officially renamed as SS Police Regiments, also incorporating ethnic German volunteers from Eastern Europe. In 1941, the police division was transferred to East Prussia for training, coming under the direct control of the SS. It took part in Operation Barbarossa alongside Army Group North fighting in Luga, where it suffered 2,000 casualties and lost its commander, and later defended positions in the siege of Leningrad during the winter of 1941. In November, Alfred Wunenberg received the Knight's Cross and assumed command of the division. Under the command of Alfred Wunenberg, the police division fought on the Volkhov River and was formally incorporated into the Waffen-SS, adopting its uniforms and insignias. It took part in heavy fighting against the Soviet Second Shock Army, with figures such as Rudolf Peer and Bernhard Griese standing out. After another winter in Leningrad, it suffered heavy losses near Lake Ilmen in 1943 and retreated to Kolpino. It was then reorganized as a Panzer Grenadier Division and sent to anti-partisan operations in Bohemia, Moravia, Poland, Yugoslavia and Greece, where in Distomo it perpetrated a massacre of about 200 civilians. In 1944 it fought in Romania, where Johannes Schug stood out for his resistance in Banat. It later withdrew toward Czechoslovakia and was transferred to Pomerania, participating in the defense of Danzig and in fighting at Hiller and Swinemünde. Some tried to reach Berlin, most surrendered to Americans and British or were captured by Soviets. The last commander was Walter Hazer. In February of 1945, a second SS police division was created, formed by instructors and cadets. First, the 35th SS Police Grenadier Division, which never reached the size of a full division and had as its main force the 14th Police Regiment. Poorly trained, it was sent to the Neisse front to fight the Soviets in the last days of the Third Reich. Then, the 6th SS Mountain Division Nord, created in 1941 with policemen, reservists and some foreign volunteers. Poorly equipped and with deficient training, it was sent to Finland to attack Murmansk, facing hostile terrain. In July of 1941, it suffered its first major collapse during the Battle of Salla, where panic before a Soviet counterattack disorganized 5 battalions and caused significant losses. Finally, it is mentioned that, due to the growing shortage of personnel, Germany intensified foreign recruitment, reaching more than 3 million non-Germans, including many in police forces and volunteer units in occupied territories, where collaboration was broader than is usually recognized. The text explains how Hitler managed to recruit volunteers from more than 15 European countries for the German army and the Waffen-SS, motivated by causes such as anti-communism, the pursuit of national independence, or affinity with Nazism. The most reliable units were integrated as national divisions, with the Cossacks standing out for their loyalty. Many recruits came from Northern and Western Europe, above all from Germanic countries such as the Netherlands, Norway, Denmark and Belgium, forming specialized battalions supervised by Himmler's office. In Denmark, Minister Erik Scavenius supported recruitment for the Waffen-SS, giving rise to the Schalburg Corps, which evolved into the Zealand Guard Battalion and contributed men to the 11th SS Panzer Division, Nordland. In Norway, Vidkun Quisling was appointed puppet leader, and his minister Jonas Lie organized the Norwegian Germanic SS with 1,300 members at its peak. In the Netherlands, fascist groups evolved into the Dutch Germanic SS and Landstorm Nederland, a militia of 11,000 men that fought against the resistance and the British, later becoming the 34th SS Grenadier Division, Landstorm Nederland. The 5th SS Panzer Division, Viking, the most notable foreign SS formation, was sent to Bordeaux for training, but the crisis on the Eastern Front interrupted its plans. In February of 1944, the 9th and 10th SS armoured divisions received the order to assist the 1st German Panzer Army, encircled in extreme conditions near Cherkasy. The battle group of Heinz Lammerding of the 2nd SS Division Das Reich managed to temporarily halt the Soviets, allowing the German withdrawal. Although almost all the heavy equipment was lost and barely 45 armoured vehicles escaped, the casualties were heavy and the survivors withdrew to Belgium and Bordeaux. The battle marked the end of the last great German offensive in Ukraine, leaving the way open for the Soviet offensive of 1944. General Herbert Gieler reported to Hitler that the Viking was no longer operational, and the unit was sent to Breslau to reorganize, leaving only 4,000 men at the front. In July of 1944, the division was again committed to combat, this time to reinforce the German defenses along the Vistula River in Poland. It was then that Léon de Grelle, Belgian political leader and commander of the Walloon Volunteer Formation, received one of Germany's highest decorations. But the recognition was overshadowed by Hitler's rage. Enraged, he could not believe that Himmler's Waffen-SS elite had failed. He personally blamed Sepp Dietrich and accused the SS Leibstandarte of treason. In a fit of fury and humiliation, he ordered that all members of the 6th SS Panzer Army remove their armbands with the SS runes. It was a symbolic act, a mark of dishonor that resonated deeply in the ranks. At the beginning of February of 1944, the units of the 9th and 10th Waffen-SS Panzer Divisions began arriving in Bordeaux to receive training. However, the situation on the Eastern Front was rapidly deteriorating. Among the German commanders, alarm was growing. The magnitude of the losses suffered threatened to rival the catastrophe of Stalingrad. The Red Army had launched a massive encirclement, and the only hope was that the newly arrived divisions could break through to assist the 1st German Panzer Army, which was trying to retreat westward in the midst of thick fog and glacial cold. The rearguard action was left in the hands of a battle group under Heinz Lammerding, senior officer of the 2nd SS Division Das Reich. His resistance allowed most of the German forces to withdraw, though at the price of abandoning almost all heavy equipment. Barely 45 armored vehicles managed to escape. The survivors of the elite bodyguard division fled, but suffered heavy casualties. The remnants were sent to Belgium to rest and reorganize under the 15th Army. Meanwhile, Lammerding's unit was transferred to Bordeaux, although a detachment under Wittinger remained in combat, covering the retreat through Proskurov and Ternopil. The losses in Cherkasy marked the end of the last real German offensive in Ukraine, opening the door to the Soviet advances that in the summer and autumn of 1944 would push the Wehrmacht further and further west. Herbert Gieler, one of the highest-ranking SS generals, informed Hitler directly that the Viking division could no longer operate as an effective combat force. The survivors were sent to Breslau to reorganize, although a battle group of about 4,000 men remained on the Eastern Front. In July of 1944, the division was once again sent into combat to reinforce the German defenses along the Vistula River in Poland. In parallel, figures like Léon de Grelle, Belgian political leader and commander of the Walloon Legion, received Germany's highest decorations. However, the internal climate within the Waffen-SS was poisoned by Hitler's anger. The Führer, enraged by the defeats, personally blamed Josef Sepp Dietrich and accused the SS Panzer of treason. In a symbolic gesture of humiliation, he ordered that all members of the 6th SS Panzer Army surrender their armbands with the SS runes. Guderian, chief of the General Staff, received the order to carry out that humiliation but refused. Himmler, too cowardly to oppose, simply passed on the message. Dietrich, upon reading the teletype, threw it on the table in front of his commanders and, with bitter irony, said, "Here is your reward for 5 years of loyalty." He refused to carry out the order, but the men found out anyway. According to some versions, some returned their iron crosses, others made even more defiant gestures. By the 25th of March of 1945, the Soviet offensive had shattered what remained of the German position in Hungary. Vienna was exposed. Dietrich tried to regroup along the Raab River, but the Red Army quickly overran him. On the 28th of March, Austrian towns such as Győr and Papa fell one after another, and on the 2nd of April the Soviet vanguards reached Lake Neusiedl at the gates of Vienna. 11 days later, the Austrian capital fell. 125,000 German soldiers were taken prisoner. The last communication of the 6th SS Panzer Army to Berlin was brief and desperate. The garrison of Vienna has ceased to exist. Despite their exhaustion, the troops fight with exemplary courage. It was the end. The army that had been the spearhead in so many campaigns was reduced to a shadow. The Lake Balaton offensive, conceived in Hitler's bunker, had turned into a cemetery. It has a fitting name, Dietrich would later say with bitterness. The 6th SS Panzer Army had only 6 tanks left. By the end of April, Vienna was lost, Hungary too, and within a few weeks Hitler. Were the Waffen-SS heroic patriots or ideological fanatics complicit in atrocities? The answer is difficult to confine to black and white. Some commanders considered them brave and disciplined forces, others saw them as a strategic mistake. Von Manstein, for example, praised their courage, but regretted that they existed as a structure separate from the regular army, draining valuable manpower. Guderian also acknowledged their combat effectiveness in units such as the Leibstandarte or Das Reich, but despised Himmler's control, which he considered detached from military reality. In any case, by 1945, neither their battlefield reputation nor their absolute loyalty to the Führer could save them from final defeat. Hitler not only used the Waffen-SS as a combat force, but also as a political tool to divide and weaken the regular army. After the failed assassination attempt of the 20th of July of 1944, his paranoia soared. He multiplied SS formations, many of them created with foreign recruits, to prevent any single branch of the armed forces from challenging his power. General Heinz Guderian, chief of the Army General Staff, recalled how on one occasion the 30th SS Grenadier Division, formed by Russian recruits, was assigned to his unit. From the very beginning, he considered it undisciplined and practically mutinous. He advised dissolving it, but his warnings were ignored. The result was predictable: massive desertions in the middle of the campaign. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments, also warned about the inefficiency of this system. Each Waffen-SS division maintained its own bureaucracy for the transport of supplies, communications, and even medical services, an enormous expense that drained vital resources from the Wehrmacht. For Hitler, however, these parallel structures were an advantage. They ensured that no military branch accumulated too much power. This divide and rule sowed resentment. Major Baron Freytag von Loringhoven, a member of the General Staff, recalled how the Waffen-SS tried to circumvent the authority of the army and launched accusations against its officers, deteriorating relations between the two forces. Even so, Guderian affirmed that on the battlefield there was a certain camaraderie between regular army soldiers and the SS. Elite units, such as the Leibstandarte or the Das Reich, could fight with extraordinary tenacity. But none of that erased their direct involvement in war crimes from the very first day of the conflict. The atrocities followed as an inseparable shadow of their history. In September of 1939, SS troops executed 50 Jews inside a synagogue in Poland. Although one of those responsible was brought before a military tribunal, his death sentence was annulled by a judge who alleged racial provocation and youthful enthusiasm. It was a chilling reflection of the moral and legal standards of the Third Reich. In 1940, the Totenkopf division massacred surrendered British soldiers at Paradis, France. On the Eastern Front, they routinely executed partisans and civilians, earning a reputation for brutality that even Field Marshal von Manstein recognized, though he admitted that as a fighting force, they could be effective despite their irregular training and reckless losses. The Leibstandarte, for its part, was responsible for the massacre of British prisoners at Wormhout in 1940, and 4 years later, implicated in the Malmedy massacre during the Ardennes offensive. These episodes confirmed that behind the image of fanatically loyal soldiers, there was a history stained with blood and systematic crimes. In Russia, the Waffen-SS showed even fewer restraints than on other fronts. It cannot be denied that all sides committed mass crimes, shootings and killings of partisans, especially among American forces in Italy and Normandy. However, several SS units left a particularly grim legacy. The Florian Geyer Division murdered thousands of civilians in the Pripyat marshes. The Dirlewanger Brigade took part in mass executions near Minsk and carried out the infamous massacre of civilians in Oradour-sur-Glane. Nevertheless, there were isolated cases of relatively decent treatment toward prisoners. Divisions such as the Frundsberg and the Hohenstaufen, according to some reports, treated captured Allied troops in Arnhem with a certain degree of correctness. This contrast is striking within the same military organization. The responsibility for these crimes ultimately fell on Adolf Hitler. The Führer demanded bloody reprisals for every German soldier captured or executed. Albert Speer would later recall how Hitler, upon learning that Soviet forces had executed prisoners, insisted that blood must be paid with blood. The SS units across Europe, whether in Russia, Greece or Italy, embraced this command with fanaticism. The 4th SS Grenadier Division Polizei and the 16th SS Panzergrenadier Division Reichsführer SS perpetrated massacres in Greece and Italy. Heinz Guderian criticized the militarization of the SS and the incorporation of unreliable foreign volunteers, which discredited its combat forces. In the final years of the war, the SS executed more than 14,000 Germans in summary trials, becoming executioners of their own population. The Nuremberg and Dachau trials rejected the idea that the Waffen-SS were only combat troops, highlighting their direct participation in war crimes, the Einsatzgruppen, and the administration of concentration camps. Ultimately, all branches of the SS served the same regime and applied the same policies, regardless of their function or nationality. After the war, the fates of the leaders and members of the Waffen-SS were varied. Himmler committed suicide in 1945. Eicher was killed in combat in 1943. Dietrich and Peiper were convicted for the Malmedy massacre, serving 10 and 12 years respectively, although Peiper was murdered in France in 1976. Others, such as Priess, Meyer or Knöchlein, faced sentences ranging from prison to execution. Some, such as Steiner, Bittrich and Weidinger, were acquitted. Figures like de Grelle lived in exile, and defenders such as Hauser and Meyer maintained until the end that the Waffen-SS were soldiers like any other, despite the proven crimes. The fall of the Waffen-SS. In the last days of Berlin, Mohnke led about 2,000 men defending the citadel, including the Reichstag and the Chancellery, in Operation Clausewitz. Among the final forces were German and foreign SS grenadiers, including French from the Charlemagne Division, the Nordland Division, and Spaniards under Miguel Esguerra. Surrounded by the Red Army, they fought to the end, carrying out the order to fight to the last man. According to reports, Himmler passed by them in a car without even looking at them, which illustrated his disdain for the foreign volunteers who had fought so loyally north of Berlin. The 3rd SS Panzer Corps, once part of Steiner's 11th SS Panzer Army, had the task of launching a relief attack against the capital. Hitler himself declared that the outcome of Steiner's mission would decide the fate of Berlin. However, Steiner refused to carry out the order. He later explained that the plan was pure fantasy. He simply did not have the troops or resources to execute it. Instead, he ordered a withdrawal toward the Elbe River, preferring surrender to the Americans over capture by the Soviets. When Hitler learned of this, he exploded with rage and declared, "It is all over, all of it." Himmler, for his part, found himself disgraced after proclaiming himself Hitler's successor. The enraged Führer dismissed him, accusing him of treason. Himmler fled to Flensburg with a small contingent of guards. Meanwhile, SS Gruppenführer Hermann Fegelein, Himmler's liaison in the Chancellery, was arrested while trying to flee dressed as a civilian. He carried his pockets full of money. He was executed for desertion despite the prevailing chaos. Mohnke's men achieved a brief tactical success on the 27th of April by halting a Soviet tank advance in Potsdamer Platz. Mohnke described how the tanks, blocked by rubble, became vulnerable to close-range attacks. However, the Soviets simply withdrew and resumed bombardment from a distance. Krukenberg, operating from the U-Bahn station, reported a direct artillery hit that same 27th of April. 4 men were killed and 15 were wounded. The next day, Scheller was injured by shrapnel. The wound in his leg turned gangrenous. French volunteers under Krukenberg, together with men of Ziegler's Nordland, formed tank hunter squads and blocked the main approaches to the Chancellery. They held positions on Friedrichstrasse, Wilhelmstrasse, and around the Belle Alliance platforms. The Air Ministry south of the Chancellery also remained in German hands. A lone Tiger tank, commanded by Hermann von Alser, provided critical cover in the vicinity of Potsdamer Platz. Its actions were fierce. SS Oberscharführer François Apollot and SS Unterscharführer Eugène Volot of the Charlemagne Division were awarded the Knight's Cross for destroying 14 Soviet tanks. Both died shortly afterward. SS Oberführer Wilhelm Weber, a German officer, received the same honor for destroying 8 tanks and survived the war. 4 more Frenchmen received the Iron Cross for collectively destroying 15 tanks, although many were killed before the fall of Berlin. Krukenberg recalled that in the end half of his troops were not German: Scandinavians, Dutch, French, and even a Latvian battalion. He believed that these foreign volunteers were doing much of the real fighting, while Mohnke's men remained in reserve. Even so, Mohnke's forces were eventually overwhelmed. The Soviets captured the Reichstag and advanced until they were only a few streets away from the Chancellery. Only 700 members of the Leibstandarte defended Hitler's last refuge near the Hotel Adlon. It fell, much of the Chancellery garden was lost, and Potsdamer Platz was almost completely surrounded. Only 17 Frenchmen resisted in the Potsdam train station. Krukenberg, inspecting the Air Ministry, found it abandoned. He discovered 100 Luftwaffe members asleep, oblivious to the carnage, in the early hours of the 30th of April. That day, Mohnke was summoned to the Führer's bunker. There, he reported to Hitler on the desperate situation. The Soviets were already just a few meters away in all directions. Hitler asked how long the defense could last. Mohnke replied, "No more than 1 day." To Mohnke's surprise, Hitler finally praised the Waffen-SS, saying they had fought bravely. Later that same day, Hitler committed suicide. According to reports, Mohnke wept and said to Krukenberg, "A blazing comet has been extinguished." He tried to lead an escape but was captured. Krukenberg also fell prisoner. Ziegler died of his wounds, while Schedler, gravely injured, took his own life. Esquiva was captured, though he managed to escape and return to Spain while the Soviets occupied Berlin. The Nordland engineers blew up a tunnel under the Landwehr Canal to prevent Soviet infiltration through the U-Bahn, but it was already too late. Berlin surrendered on the 2nd of May. Nevertheless, the Waffen-SS continued fighting in other regions. On the 30th of April, SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Weidinger of the Das Reich Division received the order to head to Prague. The city was on the verge of an uprising. Rear units, German officers and wounded soldiers had been stranded there. On the 5th of May, the Prague insurrection broke out. The SS, hated by Governor Karl Frank due to their previous atrocities, responded with brutality. Almost 3,000 Czechs died in the fighting. Ironically, at the start of the revolt, the Czech insurgents received support from elements of the pro-Nazi Russian Liberation Army. These soldiers, hoping to win the favor of the Allies, eventually fled alongside the SS when the Red Army approached. Weidinger's campaign reached Prague on the 6th of May with the order to crush the revolt. The advance was slow, the streets were blocked and each intersection turned into an ambush. When a Czech officer tried to negotiate, Weidinger only accepted a brief ceasefire. His priority was no longer victory but evacuation. He organized a convoy of more than 1,000 vehicles to rescue wounded troops, civilians, and stranded German personnel, all under fire from Czech and Soviet forces. They fought to break through even when Berlin had already fallen and Nazi Germany was collapsing. Some in the Waffen-SS continued fighting not for victory, that dream had long since died, but for sheer survival. The history of the Waffen-SS is that of an organization that went from being a small bodyguard unit to becoming a vast multinational military force. It took part in many of the major campaigns of the Second World War, and its members came from all over Europe, driven by a wide range of political, ideological, and personal motivations. Its record on the battlefield was as complex as its structure. The echo of the Waffen-SS still resonates in the darkest pages of history. They were presented as a military elite, but their service record is stained with the blood of civilians, prisoners, and entire peoples. Under the oath of loyalty to the Führer, they crossed every imaginable moral line, becoming both soldiers and executioners. Today, their uniforms, medals, and flags may be kept in museums or collections, but the weight of their crimes lives on as a warning. History reminds us that discipline, courage, and organization mean nothing when placed at the service of barbarism. That was the true face of the Waffen-SS, not only fighters, but executioners of the darkest and bloodiest side of the Third Reich.